My first impressions of the Moto H20 Fusion were generally very positive, but first impressions are just that, impressions. They're positive by default unless something glaring sticks out, and most phones are generally good these days, which is why it becomes doubly important for us to test the theory that, if the Moto H20 Fusion is worth your money, so we have to objectively and thoroughly evaluate it. My name is Ershad, you're watching MySmartPrice, and this is our full review of the Moto H20 Fusion in comparison against two of its most immediate competitors, the OnePlus Nord CE and the Mi 10i. But before we move on, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button and the bell icon right next to it, because we're trying to hit 100k really soon and we'll take all the support we can. So go ahead and do that. Now, if you'd seen my first impressions, you'd know that I'd lamented about how the Moto H20 Fusion is not a unibody design. Well, it seems there are no unibody smartphones anymore ever since they stopped making metal smartphone backs. So yeah, so if you have a glass pack, there's almost always going to be a separate mid-frame, so that's going to be a separate material. So what was my grouse, what was my issue with the design of the Moto H20 Fusion? Well, it's just that the frame extends too far out into the rear panel, and that kind of looks odd. However, this helps with creating a wider frame, and the ergonomics are improved as a result, and the in-hand feel of the phone improves drastically as well. But it goes without saying that the Nord CE is the smallest, thinnest and the lightest of all the three phones in this comparison. If you want a compact phone, the Nord CE is the way to go. But between the Moto H20 Fusion and the Mi 10i, the H20 Fusion is lighter because of the use of an all-plastic build. The Mi 10i is a fair bit heavier and bigger because it uses a Corning Gorilla Glass 5 rear panel. I would say it makes it very heavy, and I'd rather have a plastic body to make the phone more comfortable to use. Now, the rear camera module is quite different on all the three phones, but the Moto H20 Fusion is the one that doesn't sit flat on a surface and tends to wobble a lot. Also, all the three have a nice matte finish, but the Moto H20 Fusion is more prone to smudges than the other two. As for the colors, it is a very subjective topic, but I'm still in love with the Mi 10i's very unique Pacific Sunrise shade. I know this color is not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but give it a chance, go live a little, stop being so boring. All the three phones come with a USB Type-C 2.0 port at the bottom with a headphone jack as well. Now, I tested my One More triple drivers on all the three phones, and natively, the audio quality of the Mi 10i was the best. It's all thanks to the support for high-res audio. I could hear more microdynamics, details and textures compared to the other phones. In fact, the Moto H20 Plus's headphone jack sounded the most closed off and unresolving. The Nord CE's Dirac HD tuning does help it make sound the second best. Anyway, for the speaker comparison, the Mi 10i actually has a dual stereo speaker setup, which definitely gives it an edge. But between the Moto H20 Fusion and the Nord CE's super linear speaker actually adds a little bit more depth to the bass or the low end, and therefore sounds better. You know what, why don't you go and listen for yourself? Now, if you've come this far, don't forget to hit that like button and maybe even comment below so that this algorithm can push this video to more people looking for a full-fledged review of the Moto H20 Fusion. Now, I must mention that the H20 Fusion has an edge, all pun intended, over its competitors with its dedicated, Google Assistant button. It is definitely an, functional advantage. Another functional advantage it shares with the Mi 10i is both the phones offer a hybrid SIM tray with support for micro SD cards. Now, the Nord CE doesn't offer that support. Plus, you get IP52 rating on the Moto H20 Fusion, which is just awesome. As for the fingerprint scanners, you get a side-mounted scanner on the Mi 10i and the Moto H20 Fusion, and an in-display one on the Nord CE. I couldn't tell any difference in unlocking speeds except for the fact that the H20 Fusion has a slower animation speed, that is all. Now, overall, when you look at the functional advantages of, a design language of a smartphone, then the, Moto H20 Fusion definitely comes out on top. Having said that, the OnePlus Nord CE definitely feels a lot more cohesive and slightly more premium as well. For example, something as basic as maintaining the symmetry in the ports at the bottom edge shows how OnePlus frets over tiny design elements like these. Both the Moto and Xiaomi phones out here actually are not symmetrical. The Moto H20 Fusion and the Nord CE use an AMOLED panel with 90Hz refresh rate. The Mi 10i does offer higher 120Hz refresh rate, but it is an IPS LCD panel. Now, what is the H20 Fusion's advantage, you ask? Well, it can spit out 1 billion colors thanks to the 10-bit panel compared to the 16 million that is possible on the OnePlus Nord CE and the Mi 10i. Now, I had the privilege of checking these displays side by side, and boy, the difference is palpable or what. The same HDR video playing on all the three displays looks so much more vibrant, and the extended color gamut just brings out all the shades in the gradient visual on the Moto H20 Fusion's display. In fact, the Mi 10i was actually stuttering during 4K HDR playback on YouTube. Moving on, the default tuning of the natural mode does a very good job at optimizing the color content of different types of content that you see on the screen. For example, you can trust the display to show close to accurate colors of the picture just captured using the camera. I didn't feel the same way about the Nord CE or the Mi 10i's display. By the way, as of now, only the Nord CE supports HDR playback on Netflix, but you know what? I checked it side by side with the H20 Fusion, and I had to literally squint to spot any differences, and truth be told, I couldn't find any. Although in my 10% brightness testing window for HDR, the Nord CE clearly comes close to the 1000 nits mark. The Moto H20 Fusion doesn't get as bright and hovers around the 660 nits mark, which is how bright it gets in regular high brightness mode as well. In fact, in regular HBM mode, even the Nord CE touches 660 odd nits. The less said about the Mi 10i's brightness, the better. It can barely touch 400 nits in HDR video and regular usage. Moving on from the brightness test, my main gripe with the otherwise great display on the Moto H20 Fusion is the absolutely asymmetrical bezel and the chin size. Plus, there is this odd curvature of the internal cutout. It can trigger you even if you have the slightest inclination towards neat, symmetrical designs. As for the haptic feedback on these phones, all the three are equally bad. You get a soft vibration motor that cannot achieve any localized precision haptic response. Overall, the H20 Fusion's display is the GOAT in this price segment. Now, the Moto H20 Fusion and the Mi 10i share the same 108 megapixel Samsung HM2 sensor for the primary camera. The Nord CE, on the other hand, has a 64 megapixel OmniVision sensor. The secondary camera on all the three phones is an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter, but only the H20 Fusion offers macro photography capabilities with it. The Mi 10i has a dedicated 2 megapixel camera for macro and 2 megapixel camera for depth, which by the way is also present on the H20 Fusion. The Nord CE's third camera is a 2 megapixel mono lens. On the front, you have a 32 megapixel selfie shooter on the H20 Fusion as opposed to the 16 megapixel units on the Nord CE and the Mi 10i. Now that we have the specs out of the way, let's jump right into the comparison samples. Let's begin with the color reproduction. The Mi 10i always cranks up the saturation, as you can tell from this sample. The reds and the blues are much deeper than they ought to be. The H20 Fusion's colors look close to natural, but the brown of the table is more accurately captured by the Nord CE 5G, which finds the right balance. In the second sample, there is definitely a color cast in the Mi 10i and the Nord CE, but the Moto H20 Fusion balances it well. Anyway, we are checking for details and sharpness here, and the H20 Fusion is definitely soft around the center, and the Nord CE isn't sharp around the edges. I'd say both are equally placed when it comes to detail retention. Mostly sharp but soft in certain areas. The Mi 10i in comparison definitely tends to over sharpen. Sometimes it makes certain sections look really bad, like the reflection of the sunlight on the water body. At other times, it helps enhance typically softer parts, such as the slide for the children in the garden lurking in the shadows. Now, as for the dynamic range performance, in this picture of the object against the light, the Nord CE's HDR algorithm does the best job of retrieving details from the shadows and therefore making the pots stand out against the harsh backlight. The second best is the Mi 10i, followed by the H20 Fusion. Now, the second picture just hammers the point home that the Nord CE has the best HDR performance and the H20 Fusion the worst. In fact, the auto HDR algorithm in the camera app doesn't even tell you when the H20 Fusion is actually capturing an HDR image or not. By the way, while the HDR performance on the OnePlus Nord CE is great, it does tend to botch up the colors, so keep that in mind. As for the macros, the Moto H20 Fusion tends to desaturate the colors slightly, but it has more details on offer without a doubt, thanks to the high resolution camera. Now, the 2 megapixel macro camera on the Mi 10i is good, but it is not as good as the H20 Fusion. If you're wondering how I managed to capture this macro shot with the Nord CE, which doesn't have a dedicated camera or a mode, I did it by using the 2x digital zoom here. All the three 8 megapixel ultra wide angle cameras shoot soft details, and the lens can go almost equally wide. So what separates the three? Well, the color science parity with the main camera, and that is where the H20 Fusion does a better job than the other two. Also, the colors are nearly accurately reproduced. My only gripe would be the fact that it does tend to blow out the highlights in the sky. Now let's move on to the human subject shot comparison using the three phones, and let me be very clear out here once again, these are not selfies, these are pictures captured using the rear camera by myself. Now, I was completely blown away by the natural facial tone of the H20 Fusion here. It really shines at facial tone accuracy and even natural sharpness. When you do a close crop, you will see that the Mi 10i is over sharp and the Nord CE is soft in comparison. Even the color of the shirt is most accurate on the H20 Fusion. Oh, and don't forget to notice the really natural bokeh on the background captured by the large sensors on the Moto and Xiaomi phones. Against the light, however, the Moto H20 Fusion's facial tone is not as good as the Nord CE's, despite a cleaner highlight correction in the background with no sharp overexposed spots either. However, when it comes to processing in portrait mode, the Moto algorithm botches up gloriously. The accurate facial tones go for a toss and it oversharpens the details as well. That said, the edge detection was pretty accurate. I like the Mi 10i's portrait shot the best of the three. The selfie camera on the Moto H20 Fusion captures extremely warm selfies in daylight. The white point is completely off target. The Nord CE is the best here, followed by the Mi 10i. Against the light, the Nord CE has the best selfie. The Moto H20 Fusion's tone mapped look is absolutely ugly. Moto really needs to work on the HDR and portrait algorithms for future phones or send an update to improve this one. When it comes to selfie portraits, the situation is similar to the selfies that we shot. The Nord CE leads the pack with the Mi 10i being the second best and the Moto H20 Fusion coming in last with its overtly warm color tone. Finally, coming to the low light performance, I noticed that without night mode on, the H20 Fusion does a fantastic job of retailing details and the essence of the whole picture. The Mi 10i and the Nord CE have a lot of noise. With the respective night modes, I noticed that the OnePlus algorithm does a good job in the first sample. It cleaned out a lot of the noise and re-added the details that were missing in the original shot. In comparison, Moto's night vision not only makes the picture too saturated, it actually wipes out some of the details and adds noise. But the Mi 10i's algorithm is the best here. It wipes out the noise almost entirely and makes the image look super sharp too. In the second set of samples without the night mode on, you can see that how superior the Mi 10i is here, followed by the Moto H20 Fusion and the Nord CE. Now, while the Nord CE does improve with night mode on, but that's only from afar. One look at the close crop and you will see that the image is still very soft. The Mi 10i continues to be the best despite the completely inaccurate colors. Overall, I think that the Mi 10i has the best low light performance, followed by the Moto H20 Fusion and the Nord CE. In low light selfies, the Moto H20 Fusion redeems itself. Now, it does have a lot of noise, but in turn, it retrieves a lot of details compared to the Mi 10i selfie. The facial tones of both the phones are great. The Nord CE is just bad in comparison. It doesn't even have a night mode. Anyway, with night mode on, the H20 Fusion's algorithm accentuates the noise for sure. But the Mi 10i messes it up royally with a blown out white face selfie. Overall, I'd pick the Moto H20 Fusion for low light selfies of the three. Now, all the three phones can shoot up to 4K 30fps video, but the Nord CE shoots the best footage thanks to better stabilization and sound recording. The Mi 10i is not bad, but the stabilization pulls it back. The H20 Fusion does offer a wider color gamut by recording natively in the BT 2020 color space, but the footage doesn't look very good and the sound recording is bad too. The same is true for the 1080p 60fps footage. You get better dynamic range, cleaner motion and no flickers, which is a plenty on the H20 Fusion. The Mi 10i doesn't even offer any sort of stabilization. So all the phones top out at 4K 30fps stabilization. So you'll see that it's definitely can do stabilization, electronic image stabilization. Therefore, but when it comes to 1080p 30fps front camera footage, the Mi 10i looks the best. The fidelity is way better than the really soft and average looking footage of the Moto H20 Fusion. The Nord CE does offer slightly better sound recording chops, but I will easily take the Mi 10i for its, video recording quality. So now I'm shooting as the front camera on the Moto H20 Fusion and of course the Mi 10i. Both of these top out only at 1080p 30fps. But the Nord CE does have the capability of shooting at 60fps, which gives it an edge. Now, the Moto H20 Fusion's camera performance is good enough for most use cases, but it is very inconsistent, especially when it comes to software processing, like when you have to do portrait or an HDR mode. But most cameras in this price range are generally inconsistent, and you can't really pick one winner, especially between these three. Now, go for the Motorola if you like taking a lot of landscape shots, because the ultra wide is good and of course the macro is good as well, plus the natural colors that you get in landscape shots are great as well. Unless you want to shoot a lot of HDR images where there's a lot of dynamic range, then the Motorola H20 Fusion is not that good. And of course the rear cameras, human subject pictures without portrait mode definitely looks very good, like we've seen already. Now go for the Mi 10i if you want great low light pictures, and the OnePlus Nord CE if you want better dynamic range performance and of course good video recording as well. So yeah, so there are pluses and advantages in each one of these camera setups, so pick accordingly. Now coming to the software experience on all the three phones, all the three operating systems have their own individual pros and cons, but I do like the Oxygen OS experience on the OnePlus Nord CE. That is until that ColorOS code-based integration happens, and there'll be a lot of elements that look very similar to ColorOS that comes to the OnePlus Nord CE, because that is inevitable. But for now, you get a clean fork of Android with very polished apps, features and customizations galore. That said, the Moto H20 Fusion stock Android implementation with zero bloatware is also a dream to use. Heck, Moto doesn't even have its own gallery app. It uses only Google's apps. And there are so many cool gestures that you can play around with, like the karate chop to switch on the torch. And let's not forget the very robust enterprise grade ThinkShield mobile security suite running in the background, protecting your phone silently. Plus, Motorola has this new ready for feature that is very similar to Samsung DeX, but my only concern is that I don't see the point of it on the H20 Fusion, since it works only on PCs and in windowed mode that too. If you ask me, Microsoft's Your Companion app linking Windows to Android for syncing messages, calls and notifications is more than sufficient. Now, MIUI 12.5 is definitely very feature rich too and will appeal to a lot of folks as well. In fact, Xiaomi has now cleaned up a lot of the issues with respect to bloatware and ads as well. You can expect a fairly clean experience. All that said, my favorite software experience on all the three phones would be a tie between the stock Android experience on the Moto H20 Fusion, along with the Moto embellishments of course, and the Oxygen OS implementation on the OnePlus Nord CE. Which was your favorite? Let me know in the comment section below. The H20 Fusion has a MediaTek Dimensity 800U chipset, and it is as powerful as the Snapdragon 750G inside the Nord CE and the Mi 10i. Now, I don't play BGMI, but the max graphics settings possible on all the three phones is either Smooth Ultra or HD High. Basically, you can achieve only a maximum of 40 FPS. In Call of Duty, the max settings possible is medium graphics and high frame rates on the H20 Fusion, but you can actually do much higher on the Snapdragon 750G phones. But I feel it's only an update away for Call of Duty's makers to actually add high graphics and max frame rate support on the Moto H20 Fusion with Dimensity 800U, because it's almost as powerful as the Snapdragon 750G inside the Mi 10i and the OnePlus Nord CE. Now, I did run a CPU throttle and GPU throttle test on all the three phones, which will give us an indication of real life performance and show us the actual differences between the performance of these three phones. In a 30-minute CPU throttle run, the H20 Fusion was the most stable performer, throttling to only 84% of its max CPU capacity. The Nord CE was the worst, going way down to 66%, and the Mi 10i throttled to 78%. In fact, the H20 Fusion was also the coolest of the three with respect to internal CPU temperature. In our 3D Mark Wildlife stress test, all the three phones hovered around the 99% stability, with the Nord CE leading the pack at 99.4% to be precise. But the H20 Fusion consistently had a higher loop score. And as far as the temperatures are concerned, the Mi 10i got the hottest and lost the most battery life as well. In general, I noticed that the Moto H20 Fusion runs cooler and offers a better sustained performance. So if you're going to be playing long sessions of BGMI and Call of Duty, you'd be better off with the Moto H20 Fusion. Now, the Moto H20 Fusion's 5000 mAh battery lasted me 7 hours of screen on time on a single charge. I actually expected it to be higher, considering both the Nord CE 5G and the Mi 10i easily achieved over 8 hours of screen on time with smaller batteries. As for the charging speeds, the Turbo Power 30-watt charging tech takes about 1 hour 30 minutes to top up the battery from 0 to 100% on the Moto H20 Fusion. This is considerably lower than the 58-minute charging time that the Mi 10i takes using its 33-watt charger, or the 1 hour 3 minutes that it takes to top up the Nord CE 5G using its Warp Charge 30 tech. Now, while the Moto H20 Fusion's battery life and charging speeds could have been better, but it's not bad in my opinion. It's just very close to both the other phones. Now, as for the 4G network performance of these three phones are concerned, they're pretty good, and all the three also support 4G carrier aggregations. That's great. So the advantage for the Moto H20 Fusion comes in when you look at the 5G band support, because the Moto H20 Fusion offers 13 band support compared to 2 on the OnePlus Nord CE and 1 on the Mi 10i. However, having said that, it's just a vanity metric at the moment. Unless you're going to be using the phone for 3 years, then the H20 Fusion might give you a glimpse of 5G after a couple of years. So the Moto H20 Fusion has a great functional design, the best display in this segment, a fuss-free, clean software Android experience, and of course the promise of a great 5G future. Having said that, the battery life could definitely have been better, and when it comes to camera performance, it was a really close call. That said, the sum of its parts makes the H20 Fusion a great experience. I quite enjoyed using it over both the Mi 10i and the OnePlus Nord CE. In fact, on one of the occasions where I was using the phone during my review period, testing period, I actually took it out in the hot Gurgaon sun at the moment, and I had to take a briefing call for another, upcoming phone, and that was on a Microsoft Teams call with video on and with my truly wireless earbuds in my ears. And it was, extremely hot, so I expected the phone to get hot as well and maybe even give me some trouble, but it did not. It actually worked seamlessly, and that's something that, the Motorola H20 Fusion is very good at. As far as I am concerned, I'm going to be recommending the Moto H20 Fusion over the Mi 10i and the OnePlus Nord CE to anybody asking me. See, both these phones are not bad or anything. They're actually perfectly good phones, and definitely, a lot of people could be interested in it. Having said that, the Moto H20 Fusion has won my heart, and sometimes that does happen. Anyway, do let me know in the comment section below what you thought about these phones or, the Moto H20 Fusion. And if you have any more questions, I'll try to answer them. Until next time, this is Ershad from MySmartPrice signing off. Goodbye and Godspeed, my friends.